The scent of cedar shavings, camellia oil, and the faint, sharp tang of cooling metal hung perpetually in the air of Kage's workshop. It was a small, solitary world nestled in a high valley in the Hida province of Japan, where the mountains clawed at the sky and the wind whispered secrets through the dense forests of sugi and hinoki cypress. Kage, barely 19 winters old, moved within this world with a quiet precision that mirrored the intricate mechanisms she brought to life. Her dark hair, the color of polished obsidian, was always severely tied back with a simple cord, revealing a slender neck and ears that seemed to catch every subtle click and whir of her creations. Today, her focus was absolute. Her dark, intensely observant eyes narrowed on the delicate escapement of a karakuri archer, a miniature marvel of wood and brass designed to knock and fire tiny, blunted arrows at a designated target. Each component, no larger than her thumbnail, had to be perfect. A hair's breadth off, and the entire illusion, the delicate dance of gears and levers, would shatter. Her master, old Izao, a man whose hands were gnarled like ancient tree roots, but whose touch on wood and metal was impossibly gentle, had taught her that. The soul of the machine, Kage, he'd rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone, lies in the truth of its parts. One falsehood, one imperfection, and it is nothing but a collection of lies, a betrayal of the woods, the metal, the very air it displaces. He had been a stern teacher, demanding his praise as rare and precious as a flawless pearl found in an unexpected oyster. He had found her orphaned and adrift after a border skirmish had swept through her tiny village like a cruel, cleansing tide, and had taken her in, not out of charity, he'd insisted gruffly, but because her small, nimble fingers showed promise, and her eyes held a stillness he recognized. He had passed a year ago in the harshness of winter, leaving Kage his tools, his accumulated knowledge etched in countless scrolls and diagrams, and a silence in the workshop that was heavier than any anvil. She missed the rhythmic rasp of his files, the scent of his particular tobacco, a sharp earthy blend he imported at great expense. Even his gruff corrections that always infuriatingly proved to be right. Now, only the whir of her own lathe, powered by a cunning water wheel of her own recent improvement, and the gentle tap-tap-tap of her specialized hammer broke the quiet of the valley. The archer was nearly complete. Its gears, carved from dense cherry wood and polished with sharkskin until they gleamed, meshed with a whisper, its miniature bowstring of braided silk taut and humming with potential energy. It was a testament to Izao's teachings, a perfect, beautiful and, Kage sometimes thought with a pang of loneliness, utterly useless thing. A week later, the carefully maintained rhythm of her solitary existence was subtly disturbed. A stone dropped into the still pool of her days. The villagers from the hamlet of Suzu, a day's hard walk down the mountain, had been struggling. Their main water wheel, a clumsy aging contraption vital for irrigating their meagre rice paddies, had seized. Kage, on a rare trip to trade a few intricately carved puzzle boxes, her one concession to creating items for purely human interaction, for salt, lamp oil, and a few precious iron ingots, had seen their plight. She'd watched from the tree line unseen as they wrestled with the massive splintered axle, their faces etched with worry. She had listened to their frustrated murmurs, their despair at the prospect of a failed crop. That night, under the silver, impartial eye of the moon, she had returned. She hadn't spoken to anyone, her ingrained caution and her master's preference for obscurity guiding her steps. Instead, she'd examined the broken mechanism with the intense, focused scrutiny she usually reserved for the inner workings of her karakuri. The problem was glaringly obvious to her trained eye, a poorly designed central gear, its teeth worn unevenly, causing undue stress on the axle and the supporting frame. It was a testament to inefficient design. Before the first pale fingers of dawn touched the mountain peaks, she had left her offering. A perfectly carved, dense cherrywood gear, its teeth angled with mathematical precision, treated with oil to resist the damp, and a simple diagram etched onto a piece of smoothed birch bark, propped against the silent monolithic wheel. Then she had vanished back into the sanctuary of the mountains, her footsteps light on the dew-kissed path. She sought no thanks, no recognition, only the quiet, internal satisfaction of a problem elegantly solved, a system restored to harmony. It was a small act, a ripple in the vast pond of her solitude. But ripples, she knew from her master's many lessons on fluid dynamics and the interconnectedness of all things, had a way of spreading, their influence reaching far beyond their point of origin. The summons, when it came, was not a request but an undeniable expectation, delivered with the unyielding weight of authority. A stern-faced samurai, his armor of lacquered black leather scales intricately laced with dark blue and grey silk cords, bearing the mon of Lord Akamatsu Sadao, a stylized red pine, arrived at her workshop as the morning mist still clung to the valley floor. His name, announced by one of the 2 Ashigaru foot soldiers accompanying him, was Ito Kenbei, and his eyes, like chips of winter ice, missed nothing, not the array of specialized tools hanging in perfect order on the walls, nor the half-finished automaton crane on her workbench, its delicate gears exposed like the ribs of a bird. "Kage dono," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth, as unyielding as the polished steel of his katana's hilt. "Lord Akamatsu has heard tell of your unusual talents. He wishes to see your work. You will accompany me to Fumoto Castle." Fear, cold and sharp as a newly honed chisel, pricked at Kage. Lord Akamatsu Sadao, daimyo of the neighbouring, far more powerful Kai province, was a name spoken in hushed tones, even in the remote villages of Hida. A man whose ambition was said to be as vast and fertile as the plains his domain coveted, a strategist whose mind was rumoured to be as intricate and deadly as a Joros spider's web. What could such a man, a ruler of men and armies, want with a reclusive artisan, a woman whose world revolved around the silent language of wood and metal? Curiosity, a trait her master Isao had both encouraged in the pursuit of knowledge and warned against in dealings with the powerful, warred with her deeply ingrained instinct to remain unseen, a shadow in her mountain valley. Curiosity, a trait her master Isao had both encouraged in the pursuit of knowledge and warned against in dealings with the powerful, warred with her deeply ingrained instinct to remain unseen, a shadow in her heroes. But the samurai's stance, the unyielding presence of his armed retinue, brooked no refusal. The unspoken threat hung in the crisp morning air as palpably as the scent of pine and damp earth. Her small act of anonymous help, it seemed, had cast a longer, easier, more dangerous shadow than she could ever have intended. The mechanism of her quiet life had been irrevocably engaged by an external force. The journey to Akamatsu's castle town, Fumoto, was a disorienting blur of unfamiliar roads, bustling way stations, and the curious, often wary stares of strangers. Kage, accustomed to the profound solitude of her valley, the company of only birdsong and the whisper of the wind through the pines, felt exposed, vulnerable. Her simple, dark-coloured homespun clothing, designed for practicality and to blend with the forest, was a stark contrast to the vibrant kimonos of merchants' wives and the imposing, status-proclaiming armour of the samurai they passed. Fumoto itself, nestled at the foot of a strategically vital mountain pass, was a testament to Akamatsu's ambition and iron will, orderly, heavily fortified with stone walls and watchtowers, and humming with a disciplined, almost unnerving energy. Every citizen seemed to move with purpose, every guard stood with unwavering alertness. It was a city built on control. Lord Akamatsu Sadao received Kage not in a grand public audience hall, but in his private study, a spacious room, yet one that felt intimate due to the sheer volume of its contents. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls from both Japan and, Kage noted with a flicker of surprise, what looked like bound volumes from the Nanban traders, the Portuguese or Dutch. Maps of various provinces were spread across a large lacquered table, alongside strange foreign-looking scientific instruments of brass and glass, whose purpose Kage could only guess at. He was in his mid-40s, lean and imposing, with sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to miss no detail. He was impeccably dressed in subdued but obviously expensive silks of a deep indigo, his only adornment, the Akamatsu mon discreetly embroidered on his haori. A neatly trimmed beard and moustache framed a mouth that seemed capable of both charming smiles and ruthless commands. His gaze as he appraised Kage was intense, and she felt a shiver trace its way down her spine despite the warmth of the brazier burning in the corner. Yet his voice, when he finally spoke, was surprisingly mild, almost cultured, a velvet glove over an iron fist. "Kagedono," he began, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He gestured to a cushion, an invitation to sit. Your reputation, though whispered rather than proclaimed, is intriguing. A woman of your youth." He paused, his eyes lingering on her calloused, capable hands. "Possessing such remarkable skills in the intricate arts of karakuri, it is most unusual. Show me." With fingers that trembled only slightly, a betrayal of her inner turmoil she immediately chided herself for, Kaji presented a few of her smaller, more portable creations, which Ito Kenbei had instructed her to bring. There was the puzzle box that opened with a sequence of almost invisible slides and pressures, revealing a tiny hidden compartment. There was the miniature wooden bird, no larger than her palm, that, when a small lever was pressed, could flap its intricately carved wings and chirp a single, clear, surprisingly melodious note. Akamatsu examined them with what appeared to be genuine interest, his long, aristocratic fingers tracing the delicate joinery, his questions about the internal mechanisms surprisingly astute. He spoke of the importance of precision, of understanding the hidden mechanics that governed the world, an unnerving echo of her own master's words, but with a different, unsettling resonance. Where Izao had spoken of harmony with materials and the pursuit of pure craft, Akamatsu spoke of application, of potential. He offered her patronage, the words smooth and persuasive. A well-equipped workshop within the outer grounds of Fumoto Castle itself, access to rare materials, fine brass, tempered steel from the best smiths, exotic woods imported from distant lands, and a generous stipend that would free her from the daily toil of mere survival. "Your formidable talents are wasted in that remote, unproductive valley," he said, his gaze unwavering, compelling. "Here, under my protection and with my resources, you can achieve true mastery, Kage Dono. Your name could be known throughout the land." Her initial commissions, he explained, would be grand but seemingly benign. An elaborate astronomical clock for his study, one that would track not just the hours but the complex movements of the stars and planets according to the latest Nanban charts. He also desired a series of life-sized automata musicians to entertain at court functions, a display of his sophistication and power. Kaj, though her internal alarms were ringing a faint but persistent warning, found herself hesitating. The lure of better tools, of materials she could only dream of in her isolated workshop, was undeniably strong. And perhaps a small, treacherous part of her, the part that had felt a flicker of pride at solving the Suzu waterwheel problem, whispered that this was a chance to prove her worth on a larger stage. To see her creations admired, to transcend the obscurity her master had seemed to embrace. And perhaps a small, treacherous part of her, the part that had felt a flicker of pride at solving the Suzu waterwheel problem, whispered that this was a chance to prove her worth on a larger stage, to see her creations admired, to transcend the obscurity. With a deep breath that did little to calm the fluttering in her chest, she accepted. It was during her early months in Fumoto, while meticulously sourcing a specific type of seasoned, straight-grained bamboo from a village on the outskirts of Akamatsu's domain, that she first encountered Kenji. He was older than her, perhaps in his late 30s, with the weary eyes of a man who had seen too much of the world's harshness and found it wanting. He wore the simple, undyed cotton robes of a wandering scholar or lay monk, though he later clarified he was neither, having found no solace in formal religious structures. He was teaching a small, eager group of village children to read and write hiragana, their makeshift classroom the dappled shade of a sprawling, ancient Zelkova tree. Their voices, chanting the Iroha poem, carried on the breeze. Kage, usually so adept at remaining unnoticed, a shadow flitting at the edges of any gathering, found herself pausing, drawn by the gentle, patient cadence of his voice and the rapt attention on the children's faces. Kenji noticed her almost immediately, his gaze surprisingly direct, yet without the appraising, possessive quality she'd come to expect from Akamatsu's retainers. He offered a slight, courteous bow. "Are you interested in the words, Kajidono?" he asked, his voice calm, a hint of a smile in his eyes, or merely the silence they so diligently endeavor to break? His question, simple yet carrying an unexpected depth, was the beginning of their unlikely acquaintance. Kenji, she learned over several subsequent, initially cautious encounters, was a former samurai from a minor, now defunct clan. He had become profoundly disillusioned by the endless, often pointless, blood of minor clan wars and internal squabbles that had characterized his youth. He had laid down his swords. He told her one cool afternoon as they shared a simple meal of cold rice balls and pickled plums by a clear stream. Because a sword can only cut, Kage-san. It can sever life, it can carve a path through enemies, but it cannot build. It cannot nurture. It cannot teach. He was now dedicated to what he called the cultivation of minds, believing that true strength lay not in martial prowess alone, but in understanding, ethics, and the ability to reason. He was fascinated by Kaji's work, not for its novelty or potential for spectacle, but for the profound intellect, the unwavering discipline, and the deep understanding of natural principles it represented. He would often seek her out in her new well-appointed workshop, a stark, somewhat sterile contrast to the organic clutter of her old mountain refuge. He would watch her silently for hours as she coaxed life from inanimate wood and metal, his presence unobtrusive, almost meditative. He never offered unsolicited advice on her craft, for which Kaji was grateful, but his quiet questions about her purpose, about the ultimate utility and ethical implications of her creations, began to plant seeds of disquiet in Kaji's meticulously ordered mind. "Your skill is undeniable, Kage-san," he said one evening, his gaze resting on the intricate, slowly assembling components of the astronomical clock. It was a marvel of complex gear trains and delicate counterweights, designed to map the heavens with breathtaking accuracy. "The form you create is exquisite, a testament to a brilliant mind. But what of the spirit within the form? A machine that charts the stars perfectly, does it feel awe at their vastness? Or does it only reflect the awe its creator intended, a beautiful but empty echo?" Kage had no immediate answer. Her master Isao had taught her the how, the relentless pursuit of flawless execution, the sanctity of the craft itself. Kenji, with his gentle probing, was making her question the why. The purpose of her creations, beyond their inherent elegance and mechanical perfection, had been a question she had largely avoided, content in the act of making. Meanwhile, as the months passed and the astronomical clock neared completion, a masterpiece that indeed brought a rare nod of genuine admiration from Lord Akamatsu, the daimyo's subsequent commissions began to subtly change. The requests for purely entertainment automata lessened. Now he spoke increasingly of efficiency, of control, of strategic advantage. He tasked Cage with designing more robust, utilitarian mechanisms, complex, unpickable locks for his armory and treasury, ingenious puzzle devices that could serve as loyalty tests or secure communication methods for his network of spies, detailed schematics for powerful counterweights and winch systems that could, with little modification, be used in the construction and operation of siege engines. He inquired about automated sentries for his castle walls, about devices that could create diversions or signal across great distances using polished mirrors and coded flashes of light. Kaji's unease grew into a persistent, gnawing knot of anxiety. She recognized with growing alarm the dual nature, the inherent ambiguity of her creations. A gear that turned the elegant hands of a celestial clock could also, with different intent, turn the heavy winch of a battering ram. A precisely timed release mechanism designed for a dancing puppet could just as easily trigger a deadly trap. She tried to steer the designs towards more defensive or benign applications, offering elaborate plans for improved granary ventilation systems to prevent spoilage, or sophisticated flood control mechanisms for the river that often threatened Fumoto's lower districts. Akamatsu would listen politely, praise her boundless ingenuity, and then gently, but with an unyielding firmness, guide her back to his original, increasingly militaristic requests. "Order, Kagedono," he would say, his eyes like polished steel, holding no warmth. True strength, lasting power, requires absolute order, and order sometimes requires a firm, unhesitating hand, aided by the sharpest mind, the most innovative tools. The unspoken pressure mounted. Akamatsu's retainers, particularly the ever-watchful Ito Kenbei, were an almost constant presence now, their observation less about polite admiration for her craft, more about ensuring her compliance and the swift progress of her work. Her workshop, once a potential haven of expanded resources, began to feel more and more like a gilded cage, its fine tools and rare materials the shining bars. Kenji's infrequent but cherished visits became her only true respite, his philosophical discussions and quiet empathy a lifeline in the increasingly murky, ethically compromised waters of Akamatsu's escalating ambition. "He sees you primarily as a tool, Kaji," Kenji said quietly one bleak, rain-swept afternoon, his gaze resting on a complex diagram of interlocking gears and spring-loaded actuators. Kage was drafting, a diagram whose potential military application was chillingly, undeniably apparent. A finely crafted, exceptionally rare tool, yes, but a tool nonetheless. The question you must eventually answer, the one only you can answer, is for what purpose will your unique edge, your remarkable mind, be ultimately used? The crisis, when it finally arrived, did so with the chilling, inexorable precision of one of Kage's own perfectly calibrated mechanisms. Lord Akamatsu, his domain internally secure and his resources carefully consolidated over several years of patient strategic planning, unveiled his next grand design, the subjugation of a smaller, fiercely independent mountainous domain to the north, a rugged region known as Shirakawa, rich in high-grade iron ore that Akamatsu coveted for the expansion of his army and the strengthening of his power. He summoned Kage to his private war council, an unprecedented honor for an artisan, let alone a woman, but one that felt more like a final, inescapable sentence. Before his assembled, stern-faced generals, their armor gleaming dully in the lamplight, Akamatsu laid out his meticulous strategy for the invasion of Shirakawa. And then, his sharp gaze finding Kage, where she stood silently at the edge of the room, he turned to her. "Your unique skills, Kage Dono," he declared, his voice resonating with cold, unshakable authority that filled the chamber, "will be the decisive key to a swift and mercifully brief victory, minimizing the regrettable but necessary loss of life on both sides." He then tasked her, in front of his entire military command, with designing and overseeing the construction of a new kind of weapon, a marvel of engineering that would strike fear into the hearts of the Shirakawa defenders and render their mountain strongholds vulnerable. A series of mobile, heavily armored shield-bearers, karakuri that could advance relentlessly under heavy arrow fire, providing impenetrable cover for his advancing troops, perhaps even fitted with small, rapid-firing repeating crossbows of her own design. Alternatively, he mused, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light, perhaps she could devise a psychological weapon, a great, articulated dragon of wood, silk, and cleverly concealed mechanisms, one that could belch noxious smoke and terrifying amplified sounds, designed to break the enemy's morale before the first sword was even drawn, ensuring a quick surrender. Alternatively, he mused, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light, perhaps she could devise a psychological weapon. A great, articulated dragon of wood, silk, and cleverly concealed mechanisms, one that Kage felt the blood drain from her face, a chilling coldness seeping into her very bones. This was no longer abstract, no longer a matter of theoretical dual-use components or subtle incremental shifts in purpose. This was a direct, unambiguous commission for a machine of war, of conquest, of terror. Her master Isao's words, his lifelong mantra, echoed with painful clarity in her mind. The soul of the machine, Kage, lies in the truth of its parts and the truth of its intent. What truth, what intent would these horrifying machines embody? She looked at Akamatsu, his face a mask of confident expectation, then at the hard, expectant faces of his generals, men for whom war was a craft, victory a creed. To refuse, openly and directly, was unthinkable. It would mean not just ruin, but likely imprisonment, perhaps even a quiet, untraceable execution. Her carefully constructed world of precise gears and balanced levers, her sanctuary of intellectual challenge and creative expression, was on the verge of being twisted into an instrument of death and destruction. The silence in the war room was absolute, profound, broken only by the frantic, silent whirring of the gears in Kage's own mind as she grappled with the terrible weight of the choice before her. The path of self-mastery, the pursuit of perfection in her craft that her master had set her upon, had led her to this precipice, and the decision she now faced was as stark and unforgiving as the winter mountains of her Hida homeland. She needed a new design, not for Akamatsu, but for herself. Kage retreated into the shell of herself, a place of cold, meticulous thought. For days she moved through her Fumoto workshop like an automaton, her hands performing their familiar tasks with their usual uncanny precision, but her mind was a raging storm of conflicting thoughts and desperate calculations. Akamatsu's commission was a vice, tightening its grip with each passing hour. She saw his retainers, particularly Ito Kenbei, watching her with increased vigilance, their polite inquiries about her progress barely masking their underlying suspicion. The plans for the mobile shield-bearers or the terrifying dragon lay on her workbench, pristine sheets of washi paper awaiting the definitive strokes of her charcoal, a silent testament to the choice she had yet to fully make. Kenji found her late one night, hunched over her bench, not working, but staring blankly at the empty paper, a single candle casting long, dancing shadows on the wall, making the dormant karakuri parts around her seem like sleeping beasts. The workshop was cold, the forge unlit, the air stale with unspoken fears. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a rare physical comfort. "The heaviest burdens, Kage-san," he said softly, his voice a calm anchor in her turbulent thoughts, "are those we choose to carry, the ones that test the very foundation of our being. And the most difficult paths, the ones that lead to true understanding, are often those we must carve for ourselves out of the unyielding rock of circumstance." Kage finally spoke, her voice raspy, raw with unshed tears and sleepless nights. "He wants me to build death, Kenji. My hands, my mind, the things Master Isao taught me to use for creation, for harmony. He wants to turn them into weapons of terror." Kenji sat with her in the dim light, not offering easy answers or false reassurances, but listening with a profound, patient empathy. He spoke again of the interconnectedness of things, a concept she understood intuitively from the intricate dance of her mechanisms. "Every action, Kaji, like every single gear in your most complex creations, inevitably turns another, setting in motion a chain of consequences, some foreseen, many not. What will your actions, your choices now, set in motion for yourself, for others, for the very spirit of your craft?" He didn't tell her to resist directly, for he knew the terrible price of such defiance, nor did he advise her to comply, for he saw the corrosion it would inflict upon her soul. He only urged her, with quiet conviction, to find the solution that aligned with her own emerging way, the path of integrity and purposeful creation that her master Isao had, in his own stoic and demanding fashion, tried to instill in her from childhood. A flicker of an idea, small and audacious at first, like a tiny, almost invisible spring being wound tight, began to form in Kaji's mind. It was a path fraught with unimaginable peril, a mechanism of defiance so intricate, so reliant on precise timing and psychological misdirection, that it might shatter under the immense strain. But it was her design, born not of fear, but of a dawning, steely resolve. If Lord Akamatsu wanted machines of war, she would give him something else entirely, something he would never anticipate. She began to work with a feverish, almost manic intensity that alarmed her ever-present observers. To Akamatsu's spies and Ito Kenbei, she appeared to be complying with her orders with a newfound, if somewhat unsettling, dedication. She drafted incredibly complex schematics, her charcoal flying across the paper. She requested specific, high-quality materials, hardened hornbeam and Zelkova woods, strong, tempered steel springs, unusual alloys of brass, and even, to the surprise of Akamatsu's quartermasters, significant quantities of black powder, ostensibly for the smoke and sound effects of the dragon automaton. She spoke animatedly of reinforced frames, powerful actuators, and innovative firing mechanisms. The generals, when shown her preliminary designs, nodded in grim approval. Akamatsu himself visited her workshop more frequently, a rare, almost predatory smile of satisfaction playing on his lips. "Your genius will reshape the very art of warfare, Kagedono," he said, his hand resting possessively on a partially assembled framework. "Your name will be remembered alongside the greatest strategists this land has ever known." Kage merely bowed her head, her face an unreadable mask of earnest diligence. But in the dead of night, when the castle finally slept and only the hooting of owls and the silent passage of the moon kept vigil, Kaji worked on a different, secret set of plans. Her true design was not for mobile shields or a terrifying, smoke-belching dragon. It was for a series of precisely engineered, strategically placed collapses. Akamatsu's meticulously planned invasion route to the northern domain of Shirakawa, a route that snaked through a narrow, treacherous mountain pass known locally as the Serpent's Spine was to be her canvas. She had studied the detailed topographical maps Akamatsu had unwittingly provided her with an engineer's eye, her mind identifying key geological weaknesses, precarious overhangs of rock, sections of unstable scree where a carefully triggered, seemingly natural landslide could block the path for weeks, if not months. Her karakuri would not be soldiers marching into battle, but silent, hidden triggers, intricate, timed devices that, when activated, would use small, controlled charges of black powder not to destroy enemy combatants, but to unleash the patient, overwhelming power of the mountain itself. It was a defense forged from the very land Akamatsu sought to conquer, a barrier, not a weapon, an act of preservation, not aggression. The most dangerous part of her plan was the clandestine placement of these devices. Akamatsu's campaign was scheduled to begin with the next new moon, now less than a fortnight away. Kenji, his initial deep skepticism and fear for Kage's safety giving way to a grim, reluctant admiration for the sheer audacity and brilliance of her plan, proved to be an invaluable, if deeply worried, ally. His knowledge of the mountain trails around Shirakawa, gleaned from his years of wandering and his brief time spent teaching in a village near its border, allowed them to plot a series of covert night journeys into the Serpent's Spine Pass. While Kage's Fumoto workshop ostensibly produced components for Akamatsu's highly anticipated war machines under the watchful eyes of his men, the true, critical pieces, waterproof charges encased in lacquered bamboo, precisely calibrated timers made from slow-burning incense sticks, and delicately balanced falling sand mechanisms, silent trigger mechanisms crafted from non-metallic materials to avoid detection by Akamatsu's more astute scouts, were created in utmost secrecy and smuggled out of the castle grounds, piece by painstaking piece, often concealed within loads of charcoal or bundles of waste materials. Each journey into the forbidding Serpent's Spine was a desperate dance with discovery. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, Kaji's slight, agile frame and Kenji's well-honed woodsman skills their only protection against Akamatsu's patrols and the natural hazards of the treacherous terrain. She placed her devices with the same meticulous care and reverence she would use to set the delicate, ticking heart of a complex automaton, her fingers, usually stained with camellia oil and graphite, now smudged with damp earth and clinging stone dust. She felt a strange, profound sense of alignment. Her skills, honed in the creation of miniature, artificial worlds of intricate clockwork, now being applied to the grand, organic, and ultimately unpredictable mechanism of the living mountain. The day before Akamatsu's army was due to march, Kage presented him with a demonstration model of one of the mobile shield-bearers. It was impressively armoured, its wooden frame reinforced with iron bands, but Kage had deliberately designed its internal mechanisms to be slightly flawed. It moved with a powerful but discernibly clumsy gait, its shield-raising apparatus prone to seizing after a few repetitions. "A few more refinements are needed for optimal battlefield performance, my lord," she said, her face a perfect mask of earnest, slightly flustered diligence. "The larger, fully operational units will, of course, be ready to deploy with the vanguard tomorrow as promised." Akamatsu, impatient to begin his campaign, but somewhat placated by her apparent progress and the sheer imposing bulk of the prototype, nodded curtly. He was a man who appreciated results, and the machine, for all its current flaws, looked undeniably formidable. That night, under a sliver of a waning moon, Kaji and Kenji made their final, most perilous trip into the Serpent's Spine. They carried with them the master timer, a complex water clock Kaji had designed, its slow steady drip marking the countdown. They concealed it deep within a damp, moss-lined ravine, sheltered from the elements, its delicate mechanism connected by almost invisible, treated silk threads to the primary trigger points of her network of charges. It was designed to initiate the sequence of precisely calculated collapses, just as Akamatsu's vanguard was predicted to be entering the deepest, narrowest, and most vulnerable section of the pass. There was no turning back now. The gears of her desperate plan were irrevocably in motion. The climax of Kaji's resistance was not a clash of steel on steel, nor the roar of cannons, but a symphony of meticulous engineering and the sudden, terrifying fury of the natural world. As Akamatsu's brightly bannered army, confident and proud, began its inexorable march into the serpent's spine pass the following morning, its 1,000 feet echoing in the confined space. Kaji and Kenji watched from a distant, hidden vantage point high on an opposing ridge. Kaji held her breath, her heart a frantic, trapped bird against her ribs. Had she calculated correctly? Had she accounted for every variable? Would the ancient, slumbering mountain answer her audacious call? Then it began. A low rumble, almost imperceptible at first, like the growl of a distant waking beast. It started subtly, a faint tremor in the earth beneath their feet, then escalated with horrifying speed into a deafening, ground-shaking roar. High above the unsuspecting vanguard, the first of Kaji's carefully placed charges detonated, not with a widely destructive blast, but with a precise surgical concussive force that dislodged a key, massive rock formation that had clung precariously to the cliff face for centuries. A terrifying cascade of smaller stones and scree followed, then great, house-sized boulders, then an entire section of the mountainside seemed to sigh, shudder, and give way with a groan that echoed like the lament of a dying god. The landslide was immense, a thundering, unstoppable torrent of rock, earth, and uprooted trees that surged down into the narrow pass, not directly onto the terrified, scattering troops. Kaj, in her precise calculations, had designed the fall to avoid direct mass casualties where possible, but to utterly and irrevocably block the way forward. More explosions followed, almost simultaneously, further up and down the pass, triggered by the vibrations of the first, sealing the serpent's spine like a stone-choked tomb. Panic, raw and primal, erupted in Akamatsu's disciplined ranks. The earth bucked and shook beneath them, the air filled with choking dust and the continuous terrifying thunder of falling rock. The meticulously planned invasion, the fruit of years of Akamatsu's ambition, ground to a chaotic, ignominious halt, stopped not by enemy swords or strategic brilliance, but by the impassive, irresistible power of the mountain. Guided by the unseen, meticulous hand of a lone, reclusive artisan. The meticulously planned invasion, the fruit of years of Akamatsu's ambition, ground to a chaotic, ignominious halt, stopped not by enemy swords or strategic brilliance, but by the impassive, irresistible power of the mountain. Guided by the unseen, meticulous hand of a lone Lord Akamatsu, his face a mask of disbelief rapidly contorting into murderous fury, was forced to sound the retreat. The northern domain of Shirakawa was safe, at least for now. The cost of clearing the pass, if it was even possible, would be enormous, the delay fatal to his current campaign and a crushing blow to his prestige. He knew, with a chilling, intuitive certainty that had nothing to do with tangible proof, that Kaj was somehow, impossibly, responsible. The clumsy shield-bearer prototype, her sudden, intense focus on refinements, the almost supernatural, natural precision of the disaster. It all pointed to a mind as strategic and intricately devious as his own, but aligned with a purpose that was utterly alien, and now deeply threatening to him. The clumsy shield-bearer prototype, her sudden, intense focus on refinements, the almost supernatural, natural precision of the disaster. It all pointed to a mind as strategic and intricately devious as his own, but aligned with Akage and Kenji, their faces grimy with dust and etched with a mixture of terror and profound relief, slipped away in the ensuing chaos of the army's disorganized retreat. There was no visible triumph on Kaji's face, only a deep, bone-aching wariness and a quiet, somber satisfaction. She had used her hard-won skills not to create instruments of destruction, but to protect, to divert, to preserve. She had found a way to make her way, her dedication to the intricate dance of mechanics, a shield for the innocent, rather than a sword for the ambitious. In the immediate aftermath, Akamatsu did not openly accuse Kaji. Perhaps, in a twisted way, he respected the sheer audacity and cold, calculating brilliance of her counter-move. Perhaps he feared exposing his own vulnerability, the fact that his grand army had been thwarted not by a rival daimyo, but by a woman armed only with her intellect and a profound understanding of how things worked. Or perhaps he simply filed her away in his formidable mind as a unique and dangerous force to be reckoned with in the future. A singular piece on the grand board of provincial politics that had moved in an unexpected, game-altering and deeply infuriating way. Kaiji was allowed to retire from his service, her departure from Fumoto unceremonious but to her immense relief, unhindered. The gilded cage had opened, not by his leave, but by her own intricate design. She did not return to her old isolated workshop in the Hida Valley. It felt too small now, too tied to a past self, a self that had not yet been tested in the crucible of such profound moral choices. With Kenji, whose quiet courage and unwavering moral support had been her steadfast anchor, she journeyed instead to a quiet, fertile valley nestled near the newly secured border of the northern domain of Shirakawa. It was a place where the wind sang through vast bamboo groves, and the river ran clear and strong over smooth grey stones. Here, with the quiet, unspoken gratitude of the local Shirakawa villagers who had heard the incredible whispers of the mountain's divine intervention that had saved their lands, they began to build anew. It wasn't a grand academy or a formal institution, just a modest cluster of carefully constructed wooden buildings, their design reflecting Kage's appreciation for both structural integrity and simple, harmonious beauty. Here, Kage began to teach a handful of carefully chosen bright-eyed apprentices, boys and girls alike, selected for their nimble fingers, their keen observational skills, and, most importantly, their inherent curiosity, the ancient and intricate art of karakuri. Here, Kage began to teach a handful of carefully chosen bright-eyed apprentices, boys and girls alike, selected for their nimble fingers, their keen observational skills, and, most importantly, their inherent curiosity, the Sanid. But her lessons now went far beyond the mere fashioning of gears and levers, the balancing of counterweights and springs. She taught them about the profound interconnectedness of design and purpose, about the solemn responsibility that came with exceptional skill, about what she now called the way of the cog and spring, the understanding that each small part, working in perfect harmony and with unwavering integrity, contributed to a greater, meaningful and ethically sound whole. Kenji, his own path now unexpectedly intertwined with Kage's, taught literacy, history, and the fundamental principles of Confucian ethics, his gentle, Socratic wisdom a perfect counterpoint to Kage's focused, intense instruction on the mechanics of creation. Kenji, his own path now unexpectedly intertwined with Kage's, taught literacy, history, and the fundamental principles of Confucian ethics, his gentle, Socratic wisdom a perfect counterpoint to Kage's focused, intense instruction on the mechanics. Years passed, transforming the landscape and the people within it. Kage, no longer the solitary, haunted girl of the Hida Mountains, nor the captive artisan of Fumoto, became Kage-sensei, a name spoken with respect and affection throughout the valley and beyond. Her dark hair was now threaded with strands of silver, like fine wires woven into silk. Her hands, though still strong and capable, bore the intricate tracery of fine lines, a testament to countless hours spent shaping wood and metal. But her eyes, when she looked at her students, or at a particularly complex and challenging mechanism, still held that same burning, intensely observant intelligence, now softened by a profound earned wisdom and a quiet inner peace. She never again built a single machine for war, nor for the empty aggrandizement of the powerful. Her creations, and those of her students, were now dedicated to irrigation systems that made barren fields bloom, to labor-saving devices that eased the burdens of farmers and craftsmen, to educational models that unlocked the mysteries of the natural world for curious young minds, or simply for the pure, unadulterated joy of intricate beauty and harmless, delightful illusion. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun cast long, golden shadows across the valley, painting the turning leaves of the maple trees in hues of fire and blood, Kage sat on the polished Engawa veranda of her workshop. She was watching her youngest apprentice, a girl with bright, eager eyes and an infectious laugh, struggle with the delicate balance of a clockwork songbird. The apprentice, her brow furrowed in concentration, reminded Kage so much of herself, all those years ago, alone in Master Isao's silent workshop. Kenji sat beside her, his own hair now more silver than black, sipping green tea from a simple, unadorned cup, a worn scroll of Basho's poetry resting in his lap. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke from distant hearths and the faint, metallic tang from Kage's own cooling forge. "You found your truth, Kage-sensei," Kenji said, his voice quiet, content, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your own way." Kage smiled, a rare, genuinely gentle expression that softened the remaining sharp lines around her eyes and mouth. She looked at her hands, resting in her lap, no longer just tools of perfect cold execution, but instruments of purpose, of creation, of teaching. The soul of the machine, she now understood with every fibre of her being, resided not just in the mathematical truth of its parts, but in the profound, human truth of its intent. Her greatest, most intricate, and most enduring creation had not been a Karakuri automaton at all, but the winding, challenging, and ultimately fulfilling path she had forged for herself, the young minds she had helped to shape, and the quiet, resonant legacy of thoughtful, ethical mastery she would inevitably leave behind. The awe she inspired was not for an undefeated duelist who conquered men, but for a singular mind that had learned to wield its unique power with wisdom, and for a clockwork heart that had, against all odds, found its true, harmonious and lasting rhythm in a world too often driven by chaos and discord. Her evolution was complete, her purpose clear, her mastery not of others, but of herself and her chosen, peaceful way.